Sarah Chen had always believed that good mornings started with perfect lighting. She positioned herself on the oversized lounger with the sun hitting her face just right, her phone camera capturing the golden hour at 7:47 a.m. on a Saturday that felt stolen from a glossy magazine spread. The breakfast, blueberries arranged in a perfect circle around Greek yogurt, an espresso she'd made with Swiss precision, sat untouched on the marble side table. In the background, her husband Mark's new BMW gleamed like a sculpture in the driveway. "Looking good, babe?" Mark called from inside the house, stepping through the sliding glass door with his own coffee. He was already dressed for the golf course, pink polo, khaki shorts pressed sharp enough to cut glass. "You getting the content for the gram?" Sarah smiled without taking her eyes off her phone screen. "Just capturing the vibe. The algorithm loves authenticity." "That's ironic," Mark said, settling into the lounger next to her, "considering absolutely nothing about this is authentic." She laughed genuinely. After 10 years of marriage, Mark still made her do that, still found the exact pressure point between affection and honest observation. That was why she'd married him. That was also why she'd never told him about the $8,000 she'd spent last month on a skincare routine that promised to make her look 10 years younger, or that she'd been deleting unflattering photos of him from their shared cloud storage before uploading them to their family blog. The house behind them was a study in curated perfection. A $2.3 million modern colonial in Westchester County, purchased not because they needed 6 bedrooms, but because the kitchen had a La Cornue stove that looked like it belonged in a Michelin-starred restaurant. The pool had been installed 3 summers ago, heated year-round, with an automated cleaning system that cost more annually than most people's cars. "What time are the Hendersons coming?" Sarah asked, still focused on her phone. "6, dinner at 7. And before you ask, yes, I already told your mom she can bring Ethan over at 5. Their son, Ethan, was 3 years old. Genetically, he was Mark's, blonde, blue-eyed, already showing the kind of athletic coordination that made Mark's friends joke about destiny. Emotionally, he was Sarah's entire universe, though she'd never admit it so baldly to anyone except Mark, and only on nights when she'd had too much wine. "Perfect," Sarah said. "That gives me time to do my nails and set up the table." Mark reached over and squeezed her hand. "You're going to exhaust yourself, you know that." "I know," Sarah said. "I'm going to do it anyway." This was their rhythm, their dance. Mark played the concerned husband who worried about her stress levels while secretly enjoying the fact that their home was always magazine-ready, that Sarah had somehow mastered the impossible task of looking effortlessly elegant while simultaneously managing the logistics of a life that required the coordination of a military operation. He'd married her because she was beautiful, but he'd stayed married to her because she was capable. She made the world around them feel manageable, controllable, perfect. The doorbell rang at precisely 2 p.m., which meant Mark's mother had synchronized her arrival with military precision. Actually, it was Sarah's mother, Patricia, who had perfected the art of being helpful while maintaining the constant, gentle pressure of implied judgment. "Darling, you look positively radiant," Patricia said, air-kissing Sarah's cheek while somehow managing to scan the entire backyard for imperfections. She wore oversized sunglasses despite the cloud cover. "Is that a new Hermes? The color is divine, though aren't you worried about the chlorine?" "Hi, Mom," Sarah said, accepting the kiss while repositioning her bag just slightly out of her mother's line of sight. It was last season's model. "Where's my grandson?" Patricia was already moving toward the house. "Napping. Mark's mom is bringing him at 5. Patricia's mouth tightened almost imperceptibly at the mention of Mark's mother, Susan. They inhabited an eternal cold war of passive-aggressive pleasantries and strategic seating arrangements. "Well, I brought him the most darling toy. It's from that boutique in Soho. Cost more than it should, but the craftsmanship is exquisite." Sarah smiled, knowing without asking that Mark's mother had probably brought something equally expensive and equally perfect, creating the carefully balanced arrangement where Ethan received gifts of equivalent monetary value, ensuring neither grandmother could claim superiority. This was Sarah's life, a series of calibrated gestures, carefully measured performance, an endless negotiation between authenticity and the image of authenticity. By 4:47 p.m., Sarah was in her walk-in closet, trying on her third outfit. The dinner was casual, just the Hendersons, just neighbors, just people with whom they developed a friendship based primarily on proximity, and the fact that their home values were within $200,000 of each other. but casual in Westchester County required a specific uniform. Expensive-looking while appearing not to try, fashionable without being desperate, warm without being familiar. She'd settled on white linen shorts and a silk camisole when she heard it, the sound of the doorbell, then Mark's voice greeting his mother. Susan Chen was effusive in a way that made Sarah love her and want to protect Mark from her simultaneously. She meant well. That was the problem with people who meant well. They were so hard to dislike. "Ethan, baby, come see Grandma," Susan's voice carried up the stairs. Sarah grabbed her lip gloss and headed down, already composing her expression into the exact ratio of pleasure and relaxation that the afternoon called for. What she found in the kitchen stopped her mid-step. Ethan stood on a stool that definitely hadn't been pulled out before, reaching toward the open shelves where Sarah kept her collection of vintage pottery and art books. But he wasn't reaching for those things. His small hands were stretched toward the top shelf, where Sarah kept her Hermes box, the one that contained her jewelry collection, including the diamond solitaire earrings that had belonged to her grandmother, and more pressingly, the Cartier diamond bracelet that Mark had given her for their 10th anniversary last month. "Ethan, no." Sarah moved toward him, but Mark's mother was faster, swinging him down with a laugh. "Getting into trouble already?" Susan said, planting a kiss on his head. "He's got such a curious mind." Sarah's heart was still elevated, the adrenaline spike fatting slowly. He shouldn't be climbing furniture. "Oh, kids are resilient," Susan said, settling Ethan on her hip. "Mark was the same way. You should have seen the things he—" "I'm going to get ready," Sarah said, moving past them. "Mark, can you help your mom settle Ethan in the living room?" By 5:30 p.m., the house had transformed into the stage set of her own life. The dining table gleamed, set with her good china. Flowers, white peonies because they looked expensive but were actually purchased wholesale, arranged in a low crystal vase. The kitchen was clean because she'd hired a service that morning to deep clean after she'd cleaned it herself yesterday evening. She stood in the hallway taking a breath, looking at the reflection of her home in the mirror. It was beautiful, it was perfect, it was hers. The scream came without warning. It was Ethan's voice, the particular pitch of a small child who has encountered something shocking or delightful or both. Sarah's head snapped up. She'd been in the master bath, adjusting her makeup for the final time. Mark's voice, "Jesus, Mom." Susan's voice, "Oh my God." Sarah's legs were moving before her brain caught up, muscle memory propelling her forward, down the hall, down the stairs, toward the back door because that's where the screaming had intensified, and now there was a new sound. Her own voice, her own mouth forming shapes, her own body reaching toward crisis. She found them at the pool's edge. Ethan stood precariously balanced on the concrete lip of the pool, his tiny body at maximum extension. His arms were stretched out as far as his 3-year-old frame could manage, and in his hands, held over the water with the gravity of a sacred artifact, was her Cartier diamond bracelet. He was laughing, that pure, unself-conscious laugh that children produce when they've discovered something shiny and novel, and completely beyond their understanding of consequence. "No," Sarah screamed, the word raw animal emerging from somewhere deeper than conscious thought. "No, no, 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 no." She lurched forward, her body moving on pure instinct, but Mark was already there, already grabbing Ethan, already sweeping him back from the edge. His mother was crying out, crossing herself, her hand over her mouth. Sarah grabbed her son, pulled him hard into her chest, and the bracelet, the beautiful, irreplaceable bracelet worth more than most people's monthly salary, tumbled through the air in slow motion, caught the sunlight one final time, and plunged into the 12-foot deep end of the pool with a small, final splash. It sank immediately, disappearing into the blue depths without hesitation, settling somewhere in the invisible darkness below. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan, startled by his mother's sudden intensity, began to cry. Mark stood frozen, his golf outfit suddenly absurd, his casual elegance rendered meaningless by the catastrophe that had just unfolded in real time. Susan whispered, "Oh, sweetheart, he didn't mean." Sarah wasn't listening. She was staring at the water, her hand still pressed against her son's small spine, her mind fragmenting in different directions. The bracelet was gone. The bracelet that Mark had spent an hour showing her photos of before purchasing. The bracelet that had been insured but only for replacement value, which the insurance company would fight them on because home insurance rarely paid what things were actually worth. The bracelet was in the pool, and the pool was chlorinated, and diamonds didn't dissolve in chlorine, but they could be lost. They could be buried in the filter system. They could be crushed. They could be gone. The life that had seemed so perfect, so controlled, so thoroughly curated and managed just moments before, suddenly felt fragile. Like it was held together by strings she hadn't. By the time the pool service technician arrived 2 hours later, Sarah had cycled through 7 different emotional states and settled somewhere between numb and furious. The Hendersons' dinner had been canceled with a text so vague it bordered on insulting. Family emergency. Reschedule soon. Which would definitely raise questions and definitely result in speculation. The technician, a weathered man named Dennis who looked like he'd been fishing things out of pools since before Sarah was born, stood at the edge of the water with his hands on his hips. "You're sure about the depth?" he asked. 12 feet. This end. Definitely this end," Sarah said, her voice tight, her entire body positioned exactly where Ethan had stood, as if she could somehow transport herself back to the moment before and prevent all of this. Mark stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder. His mother and Ethan had been dispatched to his brother's house with instructions that were perhaps harsher than necessary. Sarah hadn't meant to snap at Susan that way, but there was a chain of causation here, and the chain started with Susan not watching Ethan closely enough, and Sarah was not in a mental space where she could be gracious about that. "Diamond bracelet, you said?" Dennis was pulling equipment from his truck. "Those are the hardest things to find. Glass, jewelry, coins, people drop jewelry in pools all the time. Expensive jewelry, but diamonds are small. They sink straight down. Sometimes they end up in the filter, sometimes they just sit on the bottom." "Can you find it?" Sarah asked. Dennis gave her a look that suggested she'd asked him if he could reverse entropy. "I'll drain the pool, go through the filter, search the bottom. It'll take time. It'll cost money. But yeah, we can probably find it." "How much money?" Mark asked. "This size pool, draining, searching, refilling, chemicals, rebalancing. Probably $4 grand, maybe 5. Sarah made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a small breakdown. $4,000 to $5,000 to search for something worth $8,000 that was insured for 6. The math was aggressively unfunny. "Do it," Mark said. "I'll need you both to sign off on this. Once I drain it, if I don't find the bracelet, you're paying for the service anyway." "We understand," Mark said, and he took Sarah's hand, and there was something in that gesture. The warmth, the alliance, the assumption that they were in this together, that made Sarah feel like she might cry. What she did instead was excuse herself and go inside and call her insurance company and discover what she already suspected. That they would require photographic evidence of the bracelet being lost, that they would likely dispute the replacement value, and that the entire process would take months and involve an amount of documentation that was almost designed to discourage claims. By the time Dennis had drained enough of the pool to work the pumps and get to the filter system, it was 8:47 p.m. Sarah stood in the backyard with a glass of wine she hadn't poured, watching her neighbor's lights flicker on across the property line. They could probably see this whole disaster from their house. By Monday, everyone would know. "Found something?" Dennis called out, and Sarah's heart leapt for exactly 2.3 seconds before he held up a bottle cap. "Probably not what you're looking for." The search continued into the next hour. Dennis was methodical, patient, moving through the filter compartment with the dedication of an archaeologist. He found a hair clip. He found 3 coins. He found what looked like a piece of jewelry but turned out to be a decorative element from a pool float. By 10 p.m., Mark had retreated inside to field messages from various people who'd heard about the pool incident through the neighborhood gossip circuit. Sarah remained outside, refusing to accept the alternative, which was that the bracelet was simply gone. "Sometimes things are just lost," Dennis said, not unkindly. "Pool's 90% cleared now, nothing in the filter system. If it's still in there, it's on the bottom, and it's going to take a lot longer to find." "How much longer?" Sarah asked. "Professional diver, probably 2,000 more. Maybe more depending on what the bottom looks like with all the debris that settles." Sarah looked at the water, which now appeared more like a disaster zone than an amenity. The thought of spending $6,000 to $7,000 to recover something that was worth $8,000, that she only lost because she'd been too preoccupied with maintaining the perfect image of her life to actually supervise her son properly, made something inside her chest tighten. "Let's drain it completely," she said. "I'll pay for the diver, I'll pay for whatever it takes." There was something almost reckless in her tone, something that felt like control reasserting itself through sheer force of will. If she couldn't control the fact that the bracelet had fallen, she could at least control the decision to recover it. She could control the narrative by throwing resources at the problem. This was how life worked in her world. Problems were investments. Money was the solvent that dissolved complications. Mark found her there at 11 p.m., standing barefoot on the concrete, her expensive white linen shorts now dusty, her silk camisole wrinkled. He brought her a sweater and a fresh wine. "Dennis says he'll have the diver out here tomorrow morning at 7, he said, settling beside her. "Early bird special, apparently." "I'm sorry," Sarah said. "For what? You didn't drop it in the pool." "For, I don't know, for this. For the bracelet being expensive, for caring about the bracelet." Mark was quiet for a long moment. "The bracelet isn't the issue, is it?" Sarah turned to look at him. In the dark, with the backyard lights casting him in shadow, he looked younger than he was, or maybe just more tired. "What do you mean?" "I mean the bracelet is a thing, and the thing costs money, and the money bothers you not because we can't afford it, but because you think it means something about us. About your value, about my value, about whether we're the kind of people who lose things." "We are the kind of people who lose things," Sarah said softly. "We're human beings, we lose things." "Yeah," Mark agreed, "we do." They stood in silence, the water before them now clearly depleted, the magic of the pool, the crystalline blue perfection that had been central to her entire summer aesthetic, replaced by a half-empty basin that looked almost obscene in its incompleteness. "I've been thinking about something," Mark said. "Something my therapist said." Sarah raised an eyebrow. Mark had started therapy 6 months ago, something she'd encouraged because she'd read an article about the importance of mental health maintenance. "What did she say?" "She asked me why I agreed to live like this. The Instagram-ready house, the carefully curated social media, the performance of having everything under control. And I realized I didn't have a good answer. I just said yes because it's what you do, and you seemed happy, and the house is genuinely nice, and somewhere along the line, I stopped questioning it." "Are you unhappy?" Sarah asked, and the question emerged small and uncertain. "No," Mark said, "but I'm also wondering if we're happy, or if we're just very good at looking happy. And I'm wondering if maybe losing the bracelet is actually the best thing that could happen to us right now." Sarah wanted to argue with him. Instead, she felt her eyes filling with tears. "The best thing. Because now we have to fix something. We have to actually do something instead of just maintaining the image of doing something. We have to be real about what matters." "The bracelet matters," Sarah whispered. "Does it?" Mark asked. "Or does Ethan matter? Because Ethan's fine. He's at my brother's house, he's safe, and tomorrow morning he'll wake up and he won't remember any of this. But we will, and I think that's good." Sarah leaned against him, and Mark wrapped his arm around her. And they stood together watching the pool drain into oblivion, watching the image of perfection literally leak away. The diver arrived at 7:03 a.m., a compact woman named Maria with the kind of quiet competence that suggested she'd spent enough time underwater to be more comfortable there than on land. She geared up with choreographed efficiency, while Sarah and Mark watched from the patio with fresh coffee. "How long will it take?" Sarah asked. "Depends. The bottom's going to be silted up, lots of debris. But a small diamond bracelet, distinctive shape. I found smaller things. Give me 20 minutes. Maria was right about the time. 18 minutes later, she emerged from the water with her fist closed. She surfaced, pulled off her mask, and gave them a thumbs up. The bracelet was in her hand, covered in algae and sediment, but unmistakably intact. The diamonds caught the morning light with the same ruthless perfection they'd caught the light when it fell. Sarah felt something shift in her chest, not quite relief, but something more complicated. She'd spent the entire night catastrophizing, preparing herself for loss, building narratives around what it meant if the bracelet was gone. And now it wasn't gone, and she didn't feel as happy as she thought she would. "Found it right against the filter intake," Maria said, rinsing it in the chemical wash container. "Another day and it probably would have gotten sucked in." "Thank you," Sarah said. "Thank you so much." By 9 a.m., Dennis had restarted the refill cycle, tested the chemistry, and given them the all-clear to use the pool by afternoon. By 9:47 a.m., the infrastructure of their lives had reasserted itself. The pool was healing. The crisis was contained. Mark went to his golf game. Sarah called Susan to apologize for snapping at her, and Susan, being Susan, accepted the apology with the kind of graciousness that made Sarah feel worse, not better, because it meant Susan was handling this beautifully while Sarah had been handling it badly. Sarah called the Hendersons and rescheduled dinner for the following Saturday. She spent the afternoon cleaning up the visible aftermath of the crisis, putting away the equipment Dennis had left, sweeping the concrete, adjusting the furniture back to perfect angles. By the time Ethan came home at 5 in the afternoon, it was as if nothing had happened. Except something had happened. Something fundamental had shifted, some invisible string had been vibrated, and even though the visible world had rearranged itself back to normalcy, Sarah could feel the difference underneath. Ethan ran to her, his small body hitting her legs with the force of complete love and complete forgetting. "Mommy, Mommy, I played with Uncle Chris." "That sounds like fun, baby," Sarah said, lifting him up. He was light, perfectly light, exactly the right amount of substantial reality to hold. She carried him to the window and looked out at the pool, now refilled, now perfect again, reflecting the late afternoon sun. The bracelet was in her jewelry box, cleaned and catalogued and ready for the next occasion that required it. Everything was back to normal. She realized with a sensation like sinking that this was the problem. The problem with catastrophes is that they're supposed to change you, and they're supposed to make the change stick. Sarah had been waiting for that. She'd been waiting for the feeling after the bracelet was recovered to calcify into something permanent, a newfound appreciation for what mattered, a diminishment of her concern with material things, a fundamental realignment of her priorities. What actually happened was worse. The normal reasserted itself so completely that within 48 hours, it was as if the pool incident had been a weird fever dream everyone had collectively hallucinated. Except Mark continued behaving differently. He'd come home on Sunday evening and told her that his therapist wanted him to explore the difference between presentation self and authentic self, which was exactly the kind of therapy language that should have sounded pretentious but somehow didn't. He said it gently, genuinely, as if he'd been thinking about this conversation and had decided she deserved the direct version of it. "I think we've been operating in presentation mode for so long that we don't know how to switch it off," he'd said, sitting on the edge of their bed while Sarah organized her closet. A typically performance activity that she'd been performing for 37 years without consciousness of the contradiction. "We're happy," Sarah had said, not turning around. "Aren't we happy?" "I don't know," Mark had replied, and the honesty in it was somehow worse than any argument they'd ever had. "I don't know if I'd recognize happiness if it didn't photograph well." The dinner with the Hendersons came off without a hitch. Sarah's table setting was immaculate, her dinner an elegant showcase of culinary competence, her conversation perfectly calibrated between interesting and deferential. She served a grilled branzino with roasted vegetables and a wine that the Hendersons' husband, Brett, who worked in finance and had opinions about everything, declared unexpectedly sophisticated for a casual dinner. "I just threw it together," Sarah said, which was the socially acceptable lie. She had spent 6 hours planning this meal, 3 hours shopping for ingredients, 2 hours prepping, and 45 minutes before they arrived touching up her makeup, despite the fact that they'd all seen each other in far less curated circumstances. Mark, throughout the evening, was present but distant. He answered questions about his work at the architectural firm with mechanical precision. He laughed at Brett's jokes, but with a quality of laughter that felt like it was coming from very far away. When the Hendersons left at 11:37 p.m., expressing gratitude with the kind of warmth that suggested they'd had a genuinely good time, Sarah began clearing the plates with the muscle memory of someone who'd performed this action thousands of times. "I want to stop," Mark said quietly. Sarah froze mid-collection of the salad course. "Stop what?" All of this, the performance, the curation, the constant calibration of exactly how to be. He was helping her clear, moving efficiently around the table. "I want to know what it feels like to just exist without an audience." "This is what existing feels like," Sarah said carefully. "This is just life." "No," Mark said. "This is a very well-executed simulation of life, and I'm tired, Sarah. I'm tired of not knowing who I am underneath the image I've constructed." They finished cleaning in silence. This was how adult conflict worked in their world, quietly, with civility maintained, with the understanding that there was a script for disagreements, and the script had to be followed precisely or everything would explode. But something had been shaken loose by the bracelet. Something kept vibrating even after everything was fixed. By Thursday, Sarah found herself doing something she never did. She deleted her Instagram app. Not her account, she wasn't being that radical. But the app was gone from her phone, and instead of opening Instagram at traffic lights or before bed or during quiet moments, she was sitting with her own thoughts, which turned out to be a lot more chaotic than she'd remembered. She found herself thinking about Ethan, about what he needed versus what she was providing. She was providing excellent nutrition, beautiful environments, expensive education, curated experiences. Was she providing a mother who was present, a mother who noticed him, a mother who loved him without an agenda? That was the real question, wasn't it? She loved Ethan, completely, fiercely, with every cell in her body. But she loved him through the lens of how he reflected on her capacity to be a good mother. She loved the image of him, sleeping angelically, more than she sometimes loved the reality of him, screaming because he couldn't find a particular toy. The realization didn't come with catharsis. It came with the kind of sickness that suggested she'd been poisoning herself with small amounts of arsenic for years, and now she'd suddenly tasted it. Susan called on Friday afternoon. "I wanted to check in with you, sweetie, about last week. I know you've been upset." "I'm not upset with you," Sarah said, which was partially true and partially evasive. "Mark mentioned you've been quiet. He's worried about you." Sarah almost laughed. Mark was worried about her because she was threatening the fundamental operating system of their marriage. She was threatening to become real, and the terrifying thing was that she didn't know what real looked like anymore. She'd been curated for so long that authenticity had become indistinguishable from performance. "I'm fine," Sarah said, "just thinking about things." "That's usually when women say they're fine that they're not fine," Susan said gently. "Do you want to get coffee? Just us." The offer was so purely kind, so completely untinted by judgment or agenda, that Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. She said yes. They met at a small cafe on Saturday morning. Not the Instagram-worthy one, but the other one, the one that served adequate coffee and didn't seem to care whether customers looked like they'd just emerged from styling. Susan was already there, stirring a cappuccino that looked comfortingly ordinary. "Thank you for meeting me," Susan said. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't either," Sarah admitted. They sat in silence for a moment. Susan had one of those faces that had lived a lot of life, lines around her eyes from smiling, a kind of weathered beauty that came from not fighting against time. She'd never had the expensive skincare routine. She'd never spent 45 minutes getting ready for a casual neighborhood dinner. "I want to apologize," Sarah said, "for snapping at you about Ethan." "You don't need to apologize," Susan said. "I wasn't watching him carefully enough. I was caught up in talking with your mother and I wasn't paying attention. That's on me." "But the thing about being a mother," Susan said, "is that you think you're supposed to prevent all the bad things, and when something happens, your instinct is to blame yourself. But the truth is, some things happen and we just have to survive them and move on." Sarah wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "I've been thinking about things a lot lately, about what matters and what I'm actually doing with my time." And Susan asked gently, "And I have no idea. I have no idea what I'm doing or why I'm doing it or what any of it means. And Mark is going to leave me because I'm a performance artist, not a person." Susan reached across the table and placed her hand over Sarah's. "Mark's not going to leave you, but I think you're having an important realization, and I think you should sit with it instead of trying to solve it immediately." "How?" Sarah asked. "How do you sit with the realization that you've been fake your entire life?" "You get fake for a lot less time," Susan said. "You make one small, authentic choice at a time. You go home. You tell Mark you're scared. You tell Ethan you made a mistake getting so upset about something. That's just a thing. You start small." The conversation with Mark happened that evening, after Ethan was in bed. Sarah sat on the couch, not in the perfectly arranged configuration, but curled up in the corner like she was trying to make herself smaller, and she said the thing she'd been avoiding. "I think I've been performing our entire marriage," she said. Mark was quiet for a moment. "I know." You know, and you've just been waiting for me to realize it. No, Mark said. I've been wondering if you'd realize it before I had to leave. Sarah felt her chest tighten. You're leaving. I don't want to, Mark said. But I can't keep doing this. I can't keep performing a life with someone who's performing being alive. And I was willing to wait to see if something would shift, but I was going to have to make a decision by the end of the month. I'll change, Sarah said, and even as she said it, she recognized the desperation in her voice. The performance of growth, the performance of transformation, the performance of being someone who was having an authentic moment. You might, Mark said, or you might not, and either way I have to decide whether I want to stay and find out. This was the terrifying part of honesty, that it didn't come with guarantees. Sarah couldn't perform her way through this. She couldn't rearrange the furniture and set the table properly and post a photo of them looking happy and make everything okay. She had to actually feel it. She had to actually be transformed. Over the following week, things happened in small increments. Sarah didn't book the professional photo shoot that had been scheduled for the next month. She told the photographer via email, which was cowardly, but it was honest. She canceled her skincare appointment. She bought groceries from the regular grocery store instead of the one that had hand-selected produce and a sommelier on staff. She sat with Ethan and didn't worry about whether he was sitting correctly or whether his behavior looked appropriate for documentation. She let him play in the dirt. She let him make mistakes. She watched him without the camera on. She deleted her family blog. She did this one early morning when Mark was already at work and Ethan was already at his preschool. Just went into the settings and made it disappear. This chronicle she'd been maintaining for 5 years, these curated snapshots of their perfect life. Gone. She felt lighter and slightly terrified. Mark came home that night and found the house in a state of productive chaos. Sarah had reorganized the living room not for aesthetic impact, but for actual comfort. The oversized decorative pillows were gone. The coffee table that had been positioned for visual balance rather than functional access had been moved to a corner. It looked worse. It looked real. Hi, he said, taking it in. Hi, Sarah said. What happened? I deleted the blog, Sarah said. And I'm thinking about getting rid of some of this furniture. It's just sitting here. We're not even happy sitting on it. We're just trying to look happy while sitting on it. Mark sat on the newly repurposed couch, testing it. This is better, he said. You can actually relax. I don't know how to be happy without performing it, Sarah said. I'm not sure I know how to be happy at all. Maybe that's where we start, Mark said. But starting is easier said than done, and the weeks that followed were not linear in their emotional trajectory. Sarah had expected that dismantling the carefully constructed performance of her life would feel immediately liberating. Instead, it mostly felt like she was dismantling something and discovering there was nothing underneath but more performance. She kept waiting for the authentic self to emerge, like a person shedding a costume and revealing their true form beneath. What she discovered instead was that the authentic self had become so layered under performance that even she couldn't find it anymore. The first real test came at the country club, of all places, a Saturday afternoon when she'd promised to volunteer at the children's tennis clinic. She arrived to find Carol Ashford, president of the club's social committee and custodian of neighborhood standards, already there, clipboard in hand, observing the children with the intensity of someone judging a competition. Sarah, perfect timing, Carol called. She was the kind of woman who'd never stopped being popular in high school. I wanted to ask if you'd be interested in co-chairing the summer gala committee. This was the moment. This was where Sarah would have said yes, already internally calculating what themes were trending, what decorations could be sourced, how the event could be leveraged into social capital. I don't think so, Sarah said. I'm kind of stepping back from the social committee stuff. Carol's expression froze in a way that was almost comical. Oh, I see. Is something wrong? Has something happened? Nothing's wrong, Sarah said. I just realized I was doing it because I thought I was supposed to, not because I wanted to. I see, Carol said again, and Sarah could see her recalibrating, could see the machinery of neighborhood assessment shifting to accommodate this new data point. Sarah was withdrawing. Sarah was opting out. Sarah was becoming unreliable. It was strange how much she'd cared about Carol's assessment 24 hours ago, and how little she cared now. But that didn't mean it didn't have consequences. By Thursday, Sarah had received exactly 0 invitations to weekend activities. The group chat that had been a constant stream of messages, coffee meetups, book club, impromptu lunches, had gone quiet. She'd been subtly excommunicated. Not banned, but deprioritized, relegated to the outer circle of friendships. She mentioned this to Mark over dinner. "So," he said, and the tone was perhaps harsher than he intended. "So those are my friends," Sarah said. "Were they, though?" Mark asked. "Or were they people who liked the version of you that was performing?" "What's the difference?" "The difference is that real friends would want to know you. These people just wanted to confirm their own status by proximity to you." Sarah pushed her food around her plate. "I'm lonely." "I know," Mark said, "and I think that's good." "How is that good?" "Because maybe loneliness is what you need to feel right now. Maybe you need to sit with being uncomfortable and not try to fix it immediately." This was new Mark, the Mark who'd been going to therapy and had started reading books about emotional development and had begun to sound, occasionally, like a self-help podcast. She didn't dislike this version of her husband, but she also didn't entirely recognize him. "Are you happier?" she asked him. "Than what?" "Than before, than when we were performing perfectly." Mark set down his fork. "I don't think happiness is the right metric," he said carefully. "I think I'm more present, I think I'm more engaged, I think I'm more uncertain, which terrifies me. But is that happiness? I don't know." The answer wasn't comforting. The incident with Patricia happened the following week. Sarah's mother called with an agenda, ostensibly to discuss what Ethan might want for his upcoming 4th birthday party, but actually to ascertain whether Sarah had lost her mind entirely. "Darling, I heard from Carol that you've stepped back from your committee work. Is everything all right?" "Yes, Mom, everything's fine." "It's not the bracelet, is it? Because that's completely recovered, and there's really no need to keep having a reaction to it." Sarah closed her eyes. "It's not about the bracelet." "Well, what is it about?" Patricia's voice had taken on that particular tone that suggested she was preparing to be concerned in a way that would be helpful and therefore impossible to refuse. "Are you having some kind of episode? Because your father had a cousin who had a similar situation, suddenly decided she was going to redesign her entire life, and it turned out to be the early stages of bipolar." "I'm not having an episode," Sarah said. "I'm just reevaluating things." "What things?" "How I spend my time. Why I spend it that way. Whether I'm actually happy or if I've just convinced myself that performing happiness is the same as experiencing it." The silence from Patricia's end was profound and lengthy. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted into something more guarded. "I see. And how is Mark taking this?" "He's supportive." "Is he?" Patricia said, and the statement was phrased as a question. "Because it sounds to me like maybe you've both gotten a little lost. Lost in the abstractions. Lost in the questioning everything about your life." "Maybe," Sarah said. "Your father went through something similar. After he turned 40. Suddenly all this existential questioning about meaning and authenticity and whether he was really happy. It lasted about 8 months before he realized he was just having a midlife crisis and needed to accept that this is what life is. A series of practical decisions, and you make the best of them, and you don't constantly interrogate them because questioning everything is paralyzing." "Is that what happened?" Sarah asked. "He questioned things and then just stopped." "He realized that the questioning was a luxury we couldn't afford. That we had responsibilities, to each other, to you, to maintaining the life we'd built. And that the alternative to the life we had wasn't happiness, it was just chaos." After they hung up, Sarah sat with this. The idea that her mother was essentially recommending she stop thinking and just accept the performance as a permanent condition was almost funny in how dystopian it sounded. Except it wasn't funny, because her mother's advice had kept her in a functioning marriage, in a successful life, for 35 years. Maybe that was worth something. The real breaking point came on a Saturday morning in mid-July, 8 weeks after the bracelet had fallen into the pool. Sarah had been trying to do what Susan had suggested: make small, authentic choices, sit with uncomfortable feelings, resist the urge to fix everything immediately through performance and social management. But the authentic choices had depleted her social capital to the point where she was spending significant amounts of time alone, which meant she was spending significant amounts of time thinking, which meant she was descending into exactly the kind of spiral that her mother had warned about. Mark was still present in the house, but he was presenting a version of himself that suggested he was waiting for something, waiting to decide whether to stay or leave, waiting to see if Sarah would transform into someone he could actually be with, waiting for permission to not have to stay anymore. Ethan was 4 years old now, and his birthday party, which she'd been planning obsessively, but authentically. The irony was not lost on her, in her head, had been shifted to a low-key gathering at a public park instead of the elaborate affair she would normally have orchestrated. She was preparing the picnic. Sandwiches, fruit, juice boxes, nothing fancy. When Mark came into the kitchen with a particular expression that she recognized as the precursor to a major conversation. "We should talk," he said. "Okay," Sarah said, setting down the knife she'd been using to cut sandwiches. "I've been thinking, and I think we should go to couples therapy." This was not what she expected. She expected an ultimatum. She expected him to say that he'd made a decision, that he'd filed papers, that he'd found an apartment. She expected an ending, not a redirection. "Really?" Sarah said. "Really, because I think what you're doing, this dismantling of everything, it's good. I think it's necessary. But I also think you're doing it alone, and I'm not sure you should be doing it alone." "I thought you wanted me to change," Sarah said. "I do, but I don't want you to change in a vacuum while I'm watching from the sidelines keeping score. I think we both need to figure out what we want, and maybe a therapist could help us do that." By the following Thursday, they were sitting in a small office in a renovated brownstone, facing a woman named Dr. Patricia Chen, no relation to Mark, who had the kind of calm demeanor that suggested she'd seen enough human dysfunction that nothing surprised her anymore. "I want to start by asking why you're here," she said. "My wife is having some kind of existential crisis," Mark said without malice. "I think we've been performing our marriage instead of living it," Sarah said. "And I've been performing my life in general, and I'm trying to stop, but I don't know how." Dr. Chen nodded slowly. "And you're looking for me to help you figure out how to stop." "I'm looking for a solution," Sarah said, "but I'm learning that maybe there isn't one." "What do you think the solution would be if you had one?" Dr. Chen asked. Sarah considered this. "I think I'd want to be happy without having to prove it. I'd want to be present with my family without worrying about whether we looked like a nice family. I'd want to know who I am without having to perform it." "That sounds reasonable," Dr. Chen said. "Mark, do you want those things too?" "I want Sarah to be happy," Mark said. "But I'm not sure that's enough anymore. I'm not sure wanting her to be happy is the same as us being happy together." The words landed like a stone in water. Sarah felt her chest constrict. "What do you mean?" she asked quietly. "I mean that I've been looking at you these past 2 months, watching you try to dismantle everything we built, and I've been wondering if maybe we're not compatible anymore. If maybe the performance was the only thing holding us together, and without it, we're just two people who want different things." "What do you want?" Sarah asked. "I want to leave," Mark said, and the words came out carefully, like he'd been practicing them. "I want to leave and spend 6 months not being anyone's husband and not performing anything and see what that feels like. And I want to know if I'll miss you when I'm doing that. Because if I don't miss you, then I have my answer. And if I do, then maybe we can figure out how to actually be together instead of just performing together." Sarah looked at her hands. "You're leaving." "I'm going to stay in a hotel for a while. I'll see Ethan on weekends. I'll pay for everything. But I need to be gone for a little bit." "This is because of the therapy. This is because you've been going to therapy and reading books and having revelations." "It's because I was already gone," Mark said. "But I didn't realize it until you started questioning things. And now that things are being questioned, I can't unknow that. I can't go back to performing." The irony was that she'd been trying to save them by becoming authentic, and authenticity had destroyed them. Dr. Chen handed Sarah a box of tissues she hadn't noticed was there, and Sarah took one because it seemed like the thing to do, but she wasn't crying yet. She was somewhere beyond crying, somewhere in the cold clarity of understanding that when you start pulling the threads, eventually the whole thing unravels. "I'm not walking away because you're terrible," Mark said, and his voice had taken on an apologetic quality that made it worse. "I'm walking away because I think you need space to figure out who you are, and I think I need space to figure out who I am. And maybe in that space we'll find each other again, or maybe we won't, but at least it will be real." Mark left on a Monday morning in August. He packed 2 suitcases with the kind of efficiency that suggested he'd planned this carefully, though not so carefully that it looked premeditated. Sarah sat in the living room, the reorganized living room that no longer performed its aesthetic function, and watched him go. "Tell Ethan I'll pick him up Friday after school," Mark said. "He's going to ask where you're going. Tell him Daddy is staying in a different place for a while. Keep it simple. Don't make it into a story." "What if he's upset?" "He will be," Mark said, "and you'll help him through it, and it's going to be hard and it's necessary." Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a finality that seemed designed to emphasize the point. Sarah sat in the silence of the house. It was a Friday morning in the suburbs, which meant neighbors were at work, children were at school or summer camps, and the world had the quality of a stage set after the audience had left. Perfect, empty, pointless. She didn't check social media. She didn't call anyone. She sat. When Ethan came home at 3 in the afternoon, picked up by the babysitter because Sarah had been sitting all day, he was chatty and energetic, full of stories about the field trip to the Children's Museum. Sarah fed him a snack and sat him down. "Daddy is staying in a different place for a while," she said, trying to channel Mark's simplicity. Ethan looked confused. "Like a sleepover?" "Something like that." "Is he coming back?" "Yes, sweetie, he's coming back, but not every night. He'll see you on weekends." Ethan processed this with the limited cognitive architecture of a nearly 4-year-old. "Okay," he said. "Can I have more crackers?" Relief and devastation hit her simultaneously. He wasn't going to be traumatized because he didn't have the context for trauma. It was simply a fact in his world. Daddy was in a different place, and he adjusted to it with the kind of flexibility that came with not having any other reference point yet. By Friday, when Mark arrived to pick him up, Ethan acted like his father had simply stepped out to get milk and was now returning. Mark kept his face carefully neutral as he hugged his son. "Hi, buddy, ready for our adventure?" "Yeah, we're going to get ice cream." "We're definitely getting ice cream," Mark confirmed, looking over Ethan's head at Sarah. There was something in his expression that she couldn't quite read. Sadness, maybe, or relief, or both simultaneously. After they left, Sarah was alone in the house for the first time in 4 years, since Ethan had been born. The silence was not peaceful. It was the silence of something broken, of a machine that had been running continuously suddenly grinding to a halt. She wandered through the rooms like she was in a museum dedicated to her own life. The kitchen where she'd curated thousands of meals. The dining room where she'd hosted carefully choreographed dinners. The master bedroom where she'd slept next to Mark while they both performed being the kind of couple who slept comfortably together. She ended up in Ethan's room, sitting on the edge of his bed, looking at his toys scattered across the floor. There was the Cartier bracelet box, now relegated to holding his collection of special stones he'd gathered from the driveway. There was the space where he'd tried to climb to reach something shiny. There was the consequence of her not paying attention. The house felt like it was accusing her of something. She tried to sleep but couldn't. She tried to read but couldn't focus. She tried to call friends and realized she had none, or at least none who actually wanted to talk to her now that she'd opted out of the social performance. By midnight, she was scrolling through her archived Instagram posts. She hadn't deleted the account, just stopped posting, looking at images of her life when it was curated and performed in public. There was a photo from the summer she'd gotten the Cartier bracelet, her wrist at the exact correct angle, the bracelet catching the light perfectly, Mark in the background looking handsome and distant. 1,307 likes, 47 comments from people saying how perfect her life looked. She deleted the post. Then she deleted another, and another. For 3 hours, she went through the archive of her digital life and removed it, image by image. By the time she finished at 3:47 a.m., there was nothing left of the perfect life she'd been documenting. She fell asleep sitting up in bed, her phone in her hand, feeling like she'd accomplished something profound and also destroyed something essential. The weeks that followed developed a strange rhythm. Monday through Thursday, she was alone with Ethan. Friday through Sunday, she was alone without him. The days with her son were chaotic and undirected. They went to the park without planning exactly which park would provide the best photo opportunity. They painted without worrying about what it meant. They existed without performance. The days without him were harder. She tried various things to fill the time. She started yoga, then realized she was doing it to document her wellness journey and quit. She started reading, found herself actually engaged in books and continued that. She went to lunch with Susan, who had started inviting her regularly and who didn't seem bothered by Sarah's growing tendency to be quiet and undecided about things. "You're deconstructing," Susan said over salads one Thursday. "It's painful, but it's necessary." "How long does it last?" Sarah asked. "How long until you're reconstructed? I don't know. Maybe a year, maybe forever. Maybe you never fully reconstruct and you just learn to live with the fragments." "That sounds terrible," Sarah said. "It is," Susan agreed, "but it's also true." By October, 4 months after Mark had left, Sarah received a text from him asking if they could talk. They arranged a meeting at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory, public enough that they wouldn't do anything dramatic but private enough to actually have a conversation. Mark looked different. He'd lost weight, had grown a beard, and there was something about his bearing that suggested he'd spent the intervening months doing actual thinking, instead of just going through the motions of thinking. "Hi," he said, sitting across from her with a coffee he didn't drink. "Hi," Sarah said. "I miss you," he said immediately, like that was the first sentence and everything else was secondary to it. "I miss you too," Sarah said, and discovered it was true. "But I don't miss the life we had," Mark continued. "I miss you specifically, the real you, not the performed version. I don't know if we can make a marriage work, but I know I want to try." Sarah felt tears in her eyes. "I don't know who the real me is. I'm not sure I ever did." "Neither did I," Mark said. "But I've been learning, and I think you have too. I think we could learn together." "What does that look like?" Sarah asked. "I don't know," Mark said. "I think we move more slowly. I think we stop trying to make everything look a particular way. I think we let it be messy and uncertain." "Are you moving back in?" "I want to," Mark said. "But I don't want to move back into the house we had. I want to move into a different house with different furniture where we're not haunted by all the performance. I want us to start somewhere new." "That's not practical," Sarah said immediately, then stopped herself. "Actually, I don't know if that's practical. I just defaulted to the practical response. Maybe it is practical. Maybe it's what we need." By December, they'd sold the house to a young couple who loved everything about it: the perfect kitchen, the heated pool, the curated garden. Sarah felt a wave of something close to guilt watching them walk through the rooms like they were discovering treasure. They had no idea what would be required to maintain that perfection, no concept of how much energy and performance it would cost them. She almost warned them. She almost sat them down and explained that this house was designed to extract a spiritual cost, that the perfection came with a price paid in authenticity. But she recognized that as another performance, the enlightened woman who'd learned the cost of perfection, spreading wisdom. Instead, she wished them happiness and meant it genuinely. They found a smaller house in a less prestigious neighborhood. It had quirks: a kitchen that didn't photograph well, a backyard that wasn't symmetrical, walls painted colors that marked the aesthetic choices of previous owners. It was real in a way the previous house had never been. On the first night they spent in the new house, Mark and Sarah sat on boxes because the furniture hadn't arrived yet. "Are you happy?" Mark asked. "I don't know," Sarah said. "I think I'm less unhappy. I think I'm more present. I think I'm still figuring out what happiness actually means as opposed to what I've been told happiness looks like." "That's enough," Mark said. "Is it?" Sarah asked. "Is that really enough?" "For now," Mark said. "I think for now it's enough." Ethan ran through the empty house, his voice echoing off the bare walls, and the sound was chaotic and imperfect and real. Sarah watched him without trying to frame it as a memory. She just watched. 6 months into living in the new house, Sarah realized she'd stopped waiting for the authentic self to arrive. Instead, she'd simply begun existing in the gap between performance and reality, learning to be comfortable with contradiction. She kept some aspects of her curated life because she actually liked them. She still prepared good meals, but now she did it because cooking interested her, not because the presentation on Instagram needed to document her domestic competence. She still maintained her appearance, but without the constant surveillance of her own image. She'd simply continued, with the performance stripped away but the genuine pleasure preserved. Mark had started his own architecture practice with a partner, designing smaller homes that prioritized livability over aesthetic impact. He worked more than he had before, but it was a different kind of work, engaged rather than automatic. He came home tired but present. Ethan had adjusted to the rhythm of time split between houses without the trauma Sarah had worried about. He seemed to understand, in the way children do, that adults contained multitudes, that people could be together and apart, that love didn't require constant proximity. But the work of reconstruction was ongoing, and some days it felt impossible. In April, Sarah ran into Carol Ashford at the grocery store, the regular grocery store, not the boutique one. Carol was buying the same utilitarian vegetables Sarah was buying, and for a moment, neither woman acknowledged the other. Then Carol smiled. "Sarah, I haven't seen you at the club in forever. Everyone was wondering where you'd gone." The old Sarah, the one that had been performing happiness in a house designed to extract authenticity, would have felt a surge of hurt at the realization that everyone had been wondering about her absence. The current Sarah found she didn't particularly care that Carol had noted her social absence. "I stepped back from all of that," Sarah said, selecting an avocado. "I realized it wasn't making me happy." "Oh," Carol said, and her voice had shifted into a particular register that suggested this was the kind of thing that happened to other women, women who didn't have the discipline to maintain their position. "I see. Well, we miss you." "Do you?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious rather than challenging. "Of course," Carol said, but there was something in her eyes that suggested Sarah was an interesting case study more than a missed friend. After Carol moved away, Sarah had a thought. Carol didn't actually miss her. Carol missed the version of her that had conformed to the group's aesthetic standards, and that was fine. That was how social groups worked. Not everyone was going to come with her into this new territory of imperfection. She mentioned this to Mark that evening. "You're learning," he said. "Learning what?" "That other people's judgment is just noise. It's their job to judge, and your job is to decide whether to listen to it." "That sounds simple," Sarah said. "It is simple," Mark said. "It's just not easy." The conversation with her mother came in May, triggered by a question about whether Sarah was considering planning Ethan's 5th birthday party, yet his birthday was in July. "I was thinking we'd just do something small," Sarah said. "Maybe invite a couple of his friends to the park." Patricia's intake of breath was nearly audible over the phone. "The park, darling, well, that's quite minimal." "He's 5, he doesn't need an elaborate party." "Yes, but the party is partly for you, isn't it? It's a way of demonstrating that you're a capable mother, that you can orchestrate these things." Sarah had to sit with that for a moment. "That's actually pretty accurate, and I'm choosing not to do that anymore." "I see," Patricia said, and her voice had taken on a tone of careful neutrality that suggested she was now genuinely concerned about Sarah's well-being. Are you okay? Because this doesn't sound like you." "I know," Sarah said, "but it turns out the me everyone knew wasn't really me. It was a version of me that I'd constructed to meet specific expectations. I'm trying out the non-constructed version." "And how is that working out?" "It's terrifying," Sarah said, "and I'm much less popular, but I'm also less exhausted. I'm not sure which is a fair trade, but I'm going to find out." Patricia was quiet for a long moment. "Your father always said I was too focused on appearances. I thought he was wrong. I thought he was trying to get me to lower my standards. But maybe he had a point." "Maybe," Sarah said, surprised. "I'm proud of you," Patricia said, and the words sounded strange in her mouth like she wasn't used to uttering them. "You're doing something difficult, and you're doing it alone." "I'm not doing it alone," Sarah said. "Mark's doing it with me, Susan's doing it with me, Dr. Chen is helping, it's just different people than it used to be." "I know," Patricia said, "and I think that's good." By July, Ethan's birthday party consisted of 4 of his friends, a picnic in the park, and no professional photographer. Sarah had made a cake herself that looked objectively terrible but tasted good. Mark brought beer and played tag with the children like he was 5 years old himself. Susan came and sat on a blanket reading a book, offering the kind of benign presence that didn't require performance. Looking at the scene, the chaos, the imperfect cake, the children playing roughly in the grass, Mark's face genuinely happy. Sarah couldn't think of any version of perfection that would have been better. That evening, after everyone had left and Ethan was in bed, Sarah sat on the back porch of their imperfect house and thought about the bracelet. It had cost $8,000. They'd spent $7,000 recovering it. The entire sequence of events had nearly destroyed her marriage. If she could go back in time, she would not change a single thing about it, because the bracelet falling into the pool had been the beginning of everything else, the unraveling that had turned into reconstruction. Mark found her there and sat beside her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "The bracelet," she said. Mark laughed still. "Not in a traumatized way," Sarah clarified. "Just in terms of how one small thing falling into water could destroy a carefully constructed life." "Did it destroy it?" Mark asked. "I think it did," Sarah said, "but I think I needed it to be destroyed." "You could have destroyed it differently," Mark said. "You didn't have to let it fall into the pool." "No," Sarah said, "but maybe I needed the shock of it. Maybe I needed something so concrete, so visible, so real, to make me stop performing long enough to realize that's what I was doing." They sat in silence for a while. "Do you miss it?" Mark asked. "The perfect house, the curated life, the sense that everything was under control." "Sometimes," Sarah said honestly. "It's seductive, the idea of having it all figured out, but no, mostly I don't. I think I miss the idea of it more than the reality." "I think that's wisdom," Mark said. "Or resignation," Sarah said. "Maybe they're the same thing." By August, Sarah had taken a part-time job at a local nonprofit that helped women navigate career transitions. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't photograph well. It paid significantly less than she'd ever anticipated making. And it mattered in a way that nothing in her previous life had mattered. One of her clients was a woman named Jennifer who'd spent 15 years building a personal brand as a lifestyle influencer, and was now realizing that the brand had completely overtaken the life. "I don't even know what I like anymore," Jennifer said, sitting in Sarah's small office. "Everything I do, I evaluate through the lens of how it will perform. Is it aesthetic enough? Is it on brand? Will people care? And I can't remember the last time I just did something because I wanted to." "The first step," Sarah said, "is admitting you're exhausted." "I'm beyond exhausted," Jennifer said. "I'm hollow." "Yeah," Sarah said. "I know exactly what that feels like." She told Jennifer the story, not all of it, but enough. The house, the bracelet, the performance, the unraveling. She told her about Mark leaving and the reconstruction and the fact that she still didn't have all the answers. "So it gets better?" Jennifer asked hopefully. "It gets different," Sarah said. "And that might be better or it might just be less predictable, but at least it's real." By December, 1 year after Mark had walked out with his 2 suitcases, he walked back in. Not back to the old life, but forward into the new one. He brought his things, consolidated his hotel bill, and began the process of actually living in the house instead of performing living in it. "Are we okay?" Sarah asked him on their first evening fully back together. "I think so," Mark said. "I think we're building something real. It's not going to be perfect, and we're going to keep doing this work, and there are probably things we don't see yet that are going to be problems." "But," Sarah prompted, "but I want to do it with you. I want to keep figuring out who we are together." That night they sat on their imperfect couch in their imperfect house, and Sarah realized that this, the sitting together, the being present, the not documenting it for an audience, this was the thing that had been missing the entire time. The old life had been a mansion. This new life was smaller, but it was real. And real, it turned out, was enough. The end. Epilogue 2 years later. Sarah stands in the kitchen of a house that looks nothing like the Westchester Colonial. The marble countertop has been replaced with scratched wood. The La Cornue stove is gone, replaced with a practical Bosch that cooks adequate meals without pretension. She's making cookies with Ethan, who is now 6, and their mess is exactly that, a mess. Flour on the counter, an eggshell in the batter that neither of them bothers to remove. A dog they'd adopted last year, an ugly, anxious rescue that no one's Instagram would want, begging for fallen cookie dough. Mark is working in his home office, visible through the open door, sketching designs for a small library renovation. He waves at her, and she waves back, and no one is documenting it. Outside, the house sits on a quiet street in a neighborhood that had never been fashionable and probably never will be. There's a community garden 3 blocks away where they've started volunteering on weekends. There's a farmer's market they go to without planning their outfits. There's a life that doesn't perform. The cookies are burning slightly. Sarah removes them from the oven, and they're imperfect. Some too dark, some too light, all of them misshapen. Ethan eats one and declares it delicious, and it probably isn't, but that's okay. Patricia called last week asking if she could visit. Sarah said yes, wondering if her mother would find this life wanting compared to the one she'd built for herself. She probably will. But Sarah has learned that other people's judgments are just weather. They happen around you, but you don't have to let them inside if you're not willing. Susan brought them a plant when they moved in, a practical green thing that doesn't require special attention. It's still alive on the windowsill, which is the mark of success in their household. Dr. Chen's office is still a monthly stop, couples therapy gradually becoming individual sessions, gradually becoming just occasional check-ins. Not because everything is resolved, but because Sarah and Mark have learned to argue about real things rather than about whether their arguments are performing convincingly enough. The pool in the old house is being drained for renovations. The new owners, the ones who'd been so enchanted by the perfection, are upgrading it to smart pool technology that can be controlled from their phones. Sarah feels a strange kinship with them and simultaneously pity for the realization they're about to have. She doesn't regret the old life. She just understands it differently now, as a phase, a performance, a necessary part of her development that couldn't have been skipped but also couldn't be sustained. The Cartier bracelet sits in a drawer, cleaned and stored, a relic of the time when Sarah believed that things mattered more than moments. She wears it occasionally to remind herself of what was lost and what was gained in the losing. Ethan asks for another cookie. Sarah gives him one. It's burning at the edges, imperfect, real. And that, she thinks while watching her son eat it with complete focus and satisfaction, is everything. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.